And sweeping pardon here from the president in just his final moments while he still occupies that office, pardoning all of his living siblings and their spouses, including James Biden, Sarah Biden, Valerie Owens Biden, his sister, her husband, John T. Owens, and his brother, Francis.
On the evening of his inauguration, President Donald Trump not wasting any time getting down to business. He has just returned to the White House and is signing a series of executive actions in the Oval Office, where he is pardoning some 1,500 January 6 rioters who have been convicted for participating in the attack on the Capitol.
Well, sounds like mission's accomplished. No one's in prison anymore. Job well done, everyone. Job well done. Oh, not everyone got out? Oh, no. Oh, we still need to do this. Okay. Okay. Sorry. My bad. Pardons. They seem to be the new trend. What are they? Why do we have them? And what does it mean for a legal system? That and more on a brand new episode of The Shakedown. Before we dive into pardons, what they are, what they do, and my personal feelings about them, I first need to give a little background about, well, why do we even have a justice system at all? I mean, if we're just going to backdoor it anyway, why do we have it? And, well, let's start here, shall we? This is a book known as Bamidbar, or as some of you Gentiles might know it as, the Book of Numbers from the Old Testament. In here, it talks about a very specific set of laws that deals with sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities were for people who killed someone, especially if it was accidental. The whole point of sanctuary cities was someone would kill someone unintentionally, and then the sanctuary city would be a place they could flee to, because generally at that time, the family of the deceased wouldn't just file a protest or try and get you arrested. They would select a member of the family to kill you. That person was known as the Avenger of Blood. Honestly, just a cool title. This was justice. You killed their family member. Now, their family member is going to kill you. Eye for an eye type of law. Now, here's the issue with that. Well, when their avenger kills you, what's to stop your family from selecting an avenger to kill one of them? And on until you basically have an all-out family feud or even race war going on. So, the sanctuary city was a place that someone could escape to. And then once they escaped to the sanctuary city, if the Avengers really was that, really wanted to kill them, they could chase them to the sanctuary city, bring them in front of a group of judges, and then it could be decided whether the Avenger could get his vengeance or if he was just going to have to hightail it back home. Now, you'll notice the point of the sanctuary city is that it's understanding that when someone kills someone else, the family of the victim is going to be very unhappy. So, for society to continue to function, you have to do something to help the victim's family move on in some way. You have to give them something in return. There has to be some feeling of justice being done. That brings us to the 4 purposes of corrections. The 4 purposes of corrections that I'm going to be reciting today, may vary slightly from college to college, from criminology course to criminology course. However, when looking into this issue, I generally come across these 4 reasons for having corrections or just having a justice system in general. The first one is, like we just discussed, retribution, punishment for the crime. Retribution says, this person did something to me, and I need to see that this person is getting their just desserts. That's all retribution is. You can call it punishment, you can call it whatever you want. But retribution is the punishment aspect, the sign that this person did something wrong and we are going to do something about it. This can also lead into the next purpose, which is deterrence. Deterrence makes an example out of that person as a way to try and prevent this crime from ever occurring again. If I say this crime is wrong, and we say as a society, we don't like murder, then the hope is to say to anyone ever thinking about murder that they don't do it. I do want to point out one thing when we're talking about deterrence. The more severely you punish a crime, the less likely it is to deter people from that crime. Example, if you make everything a capital punishment, it does not make people less likely to commit that crime. Maybe to a certain extent, but the thing is, anytime they study deterrence, whenever there's a society that decides that they're gonna chop off a hand for stealing a loaf of bread or make every crime a capital offense, it never stops crime. It doesn't even reduce it. I just wanted to point that out now because we're gonna kind of circle back to it later. The next reason for having corrections or a criminal justice system in general is incapacitation. This idea is that if you take the person who committed the crime out of society, well, that doesn't give them the ability to commit that crime again, which makes some amount of sense. Once again, since we're on this subject, this theory only works really if you're just gonna take them out forever. Now, the truth is, every person, if you take them out up to a certain age, their probability of committing any crime goes down to 0 the older they get. If someone commits a crime at 15 and you leave them in prison until they're 70, the chances that they'll commit another crime are basically 0. Because the biggest predictor of criminality is age. Very likely to commit a crime at 15, almost completely unlikely at 70. We could try and do that with our criminal justice system, which is kind of what we're trying to do at the moment. However, you might see some of the issues of humanely trying to get that across. And speaking of humane, the other reason you might want a criminal justice system or corrections in general is rehabilitation. Rehabilitation, the definition that this group used, is prepared for reentry into society, which makes sense to me. If you're not going to lock people up forever, then we should prepare them to get back out and prepare them in a way so that they won't commit the same crime again, or really any crime. And honestly, I think if we had the most ideal, most amazing version of prisons that could ever exist, then what they would be is they would be like a prep school that would release like the most prepared people into society that had the least likelihood of committing crimes in general. But notice, that's not the world we live in. So, why do we have pardons then if we have this system that is developed for these specific reasons? Like I said, pardons kind of seem like a backdoor into a system that was never designed to have a backdoor. One of the reasons constitutionally was that it was supposed to be a check and balance on power, just like Congress is a check on the president and the executive branch. This is a check on the judicial branch by the executive branch. If judges all of a sudden just start sending everyone to prison, the president can pardon them, which, you know, is nice that he can do that. It just would be unfortunate if that were the case, that everyone was going to prison. Pardon is only one of the things that a president can do. So, first, a pardon releases a person from punishment and restores all of their civil liberties. I would love a pardon because that would mean not only can I own a gun again, not that I'm in any rush to own a gun, but I could also travel freely around the world, which I kind of would like to. Like right now, I can't even go to Canada because I have a felony on my record. I've done all my time. I am technically still on parole and probation, but even having served, even with good behavior, even once I've completed everything on my paperwork and dotted all my T's, crossed all my I's, I will still have a felony on my record and will not have the full rights as a citizen that someone with no felony will have. Which, quite honestly, I think is a little bit of bullshit. Because I went to prison, folks, and I'm doing probation, and I'm doing parole, and I've paid some money to MAD, and I've done some. Well, anyway, the point that I'm trying to get here is that for someone who's being sentenced, you would think that the sentence that the judge gives is like their pathway back. But it's more like once you've committed a crime, you're now a lower class of citizen, which is, I personally think, morally wrong. But I'll leave that for you to decide. And maybe that'll be a future episode of debate. The other thing a president can do and has done recently is a commutation. A commutation reduces the sentence imposed by a court. I could potentially have my sentence commuted, like my probation and parole and everything just ends now, which would be awesome. That would be great. I would still prefer a pardon, but it's nice to it would be very nice to be off of paper and not have to deal with all of that. Someone who's in prison who gets a commutation, they get immediately, like that day, released from prison. I've heard many people who've gone through that process. It is quite an intense process. Like they basically get just booted out the door immediately. And some prisons are not designed for people to walk out the door that day. So it's an interesting process. The other thing that presidential power allows is reprieve, which delays the imposition of a sentence or punishment. You always hear reprieves on the terms of death row. So they're about to go to the gas chamber, then they get a reprieve from the governor or from whoever, and it's delayed. Not as amazing, but gives you some breathing room before, the sentence actually hits. Or gives you some time before the pardon or the commutation. The other power of the president relating to pardons is amnesty. Amnesty is the same as a pardon, but is extended to an entire class of individuals. I did not look into when the last time the amnesty power was used, but that's very similar to what we just saw our new president just did. The basically giving amnesty to an entire group convicted of a certain type of crimes. So they were basically all, by and large, pardoned, which is just gave that one amnesty for that set of crimes. Though in general, I think amnesty is more like for an entire ethnic group or for an entire you know, nation of people or something like that. Like maybe in terms of like war crimes or something like that, you get amnesty. Or though I think in this case you could potentially call it amnesty for committing a certain type of offense. So, are pardons helpful? As I said, they are a backdoor to the justice system, which is really not designed to have a back door. I can't think of a better example of that than, as I was mentioning before, the January 6th pardons. That was basically amnesty for a whole group of people for a certain subset of crimes. People were injured and people were killed that day. If this was an Avenger of Blood situation, those families who were hurt by the people who stormed the Capitol, they just lost their justice. And actually, they were also sent a firm message that this could be done again and it would be okay. Their backs are covered. So their only choice for justice would be vigilante justice, which is not great. So that's a con of pardons. However, the way to think about pardons, I think, in general, is that they're kind of a hack for a system that's not just not perfect, but broken. The current legal system does not focus on restoring society or providing sanctuary. The fix that pardons are trying to offer is what happens when a judge or an entire system of judges go off the walls and start convicting people too harshly. In our system, that's very easy to do. I would also argue is already happening. So if that's the case, pardons are used to help curb that back and say, nope, judges are punishing too harshly. That was out of line. And we're going to help save these people that were not caught within the traditional means. However, if judges and prosecutors, more importantly, were not the ones in charge of determining how long people are going to prison for, and instead we focused on just rehabilitation, not retribution, then we really wouldn't need pardons. The whole goal would just be to get people to where they need to be and help them. We wouldn't be sending people to prison for the rest of their lives or killing them. We would just be sending them to a place where they could learn, where they could heal, and ideally, we would do that to the victims as well. We would be helping them along the way. That's the whole point of restorative justice, where you're constantly working with everyone who a crime has touched and working with them to find healing to get them to a better place. But that's not our justice system right now. Right now, our current legal system, innocent people can get caught in the system and killed. Lots of people, like we have already had people who've gone to death row and then later have been exonerated. Guilty people can be punished too harshly. The pardon just bypasses those mistakes. So why are pardons so popular right now? Well, first, I'm going to tell you why I'm not ever likely to get a pardon. The reason I'm not likely to get a pardon is because pardons are pretty much always political. Yeah, I could file to get a pardon. I could apply for one and see what happens, roll those dice. However, after my most recent run in with my judge, who is also the person who would decide if I get a pardon, it's become very clear that one, at least in Texas, because when in Texas it determines on the judge and it also determines on the DA or the police if I can get my pardon. Two groups of people who are notoriously not friendly to felons. No matter what good I do to society, in the meantime, a felon, especially one who has killed someone, it's not going to look politically good to give them a pardon. And as I've said in the past, one of the things that they did in my county in particular in Texas was that they would punish harder to show how tough on crime they were. It sent a message. Like I said, sometimes they confuse tough crime with deterrence. However, that doesn't ever work. Interesting. Just like in my case, I didn't know the laws on intoxicated manslaughter or DUI or any of those. I didn't know what the laws were or what the punishment was. I just ended up doing it and then had to deal with the consequences. And most people, no matter what the crime is, they're either A, not necessarily planning on doing the thing, they kind of are like me, ending up doing it anyway, or B, not planning on getting caught. As I said, pardons are very political, and you've probably already figured that out by looking at who's making what pardons. We had Joe Biden starting off by pardoning his son and then the rest of his family, being mainly because he was worried that now that his opponent was in power, that everyone was going to get prosecuted. I don't blame him. I don't think anyone really blames him except for people who really wanted to see him get locked up. However, that's a very political reason. I do get a little annoyed by that, mainly because Joe Biden is the one who said this.
So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street.
Joe Biden is Mr. Tough on Crime. He's the one who pushed the crime bill. He ushered in an entire era of mandatory minimums and stricter sentencing laws and some fairly racist sentencing standards. And it would have been nice for him to take a moment of introspection and said, you know what? My bad. I'm sorry. I really shouldn't have done all of that stuff. I'm going to pardon Hunter, and maybe I should, rethink my stances on these things. Not end his presidency with a speech on what he wishes everyone else would do. Sorry, I may have gotten a little annoyed by that. As far as Trump and his pardons, well, that's just hypocrisy. I seem to remember a candidate who has been nonstop talking about rapists and about criminals crossing over borders, but as soon as some criminals help him, let's give him a pardon. Seems a little like he's, I don't know, picking favorites. But you know what? I'm not going to judge. No, because I actually know where this story ends. Whenever people lose all faith in the criminal justice system, and especially when that ties in with the political system, and they feel like someone's picking favorites and just doing whatever they want and spending a whole bunch of money that they don't really have any right to spend, well, we have a very recent example of what happens. It's called the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, too. And in both cases, a lot of people die. Some by guillotine, some by other methods. It's not pretty, but yeah, that's what happens historically. So, if you want to keep undermining the justice system and the political system and other things, go for it. And people do get sick of it. Okay, so I know that was kind of a depressing point and kind of, negative. Um, but what should we do? What can we do? What should we do right now when when everyone's just using pardons to backdoor everything and you don't know if the justice system is going to be on your side or there's going to be a new election and it's going to be on somebody else's side soon. As I said, the justice system doesn't need to work this way. Like I said, back restorative justice initiatives. There are plenty up here in Colorado. If there's none in your area, get one started. Learn about restorative justice. Hey, I have a graphic novel where you can learn about it. Another aspect of that too is, hey, maybe police are a call of last resort in general. I understand sometimes they are extremely necessary, incredibly helpful. But when trying to deal with situations within the community, blanket laws making everything illegal, not going to really help you. You need to find ways to work with the other members of your community and find solutions that do not end in laws that make things that are currently legal illegal. The last thing you want to do is to make everyone a criminal. I'll put it this way, even in a room of saints, there's always going to be a sinner. And with that being the case, the one way to really help everyone is compassion. Have compassion in everything you do. Look at ways you can help, look at ways you can contribute, and like I said, learn about restorative justice. Learn about transformative justice, which can totally change the system at large. And as always, there will be an election this November or whenever there are elections in your, county, city, whenever. Vote for the people who are trying to look out for your community, who are trying to have compassion for one another, and find ways to improve upon it. Whatever community you live in, there are a million reasons to live there, and you need someone who is serving your community by representing all the great things about it, not pointing out all the flaws. I know it's been a while since my last video. A lot has happened. If you want to know what's happened, I will fill you in after I do some quick thank yous. Thank you to everyone listening to this, everyone watching to this. I try to rush this out and get this back up as soon as possible. I am actually planning on locking myself in the studio for a minute so I can get a bunch of episodes back to back on a bunch of really interesting topics. So there will be no more gaps for a minute, hopefully. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching this. If you're listening, please subscribe. And if you want me to keep making this and making it more consistently, Patreon. Patreon would be a huge help. Anyone coming onto Patreon would mean the world to me. So I can make these episodes and maybe hopefully turn this into full-time work. All right. On to the updates. Yes, as I mentioned, I did apply to be on city council. For those of you who don't know, what happened is normally I know you don't apply for city council, you run. And what happened here was that the person who was the former Ward 2 city council member, who happened to be a friend of mine, she had to um, she had to go take care of her daughter in another state. So the city council, who is amazing here, decided to let her tune in remotely until there was less than a year left, and then they could appoint someone, which is how it's set on the charter, which saved the city. And by saved the city, I mean all of us, all of the taxpayers, probably around $200,000 to have a special election. But that meant they needed to appoint someone. So they came up with a process to appoint people, and I applied to be one of the interviewees. Now, in previous elections, there's been maybe 4 candidates for a city council seat, and we've had some semi-impressive people. We have a lot of people who've run before, things like that. But we had 22 people who were qualified that applied. It was crazy. We had 2 people who were on local leadership committees, one of whom has been training to be a city council member for her entire life. One person who is on the Planning and Zoning Commission, who is the commissioner of that, which planning and zoning is one of the biggest issues facing Longmont. We had 2 previous city council members who had run out their term limits but could apply for this because it didn't count against their term limits, including one former council member who actually wrote out the guidelines for the current planning and zoning, the Envision Longmont plan, which is the big planning and zoning vision, which I ended up quoting from in the beginning of my interview. And we even had someone who worked for NASA and the White House. So, who's the tough competition? The commissioner from planning and zoning. One, he's amazing, smart guy. They made a really great choice. I totally understand it because, tell you right now, that's all anyone's talking about in the paper right now is growth of Longmont. So I didn't. However, in November, I can run. And I actually did have the most people speaking for me at the beginning of the council meeting, which does mean I might have a fair chance if I'm going for an election as opposed to an appointment. And with that said, if you're asking whether or not I'm running, well, then I guess the answer is